In this podcast, we're sharing the secrets of Special Operations Executive, otherwise known as SOE. I'm at the St Ermines Hotel in the heart of central London, and it's delightful to be able to chat with Dr David Abrutat, who's a historian, and he's going to tell us a little bit about SOE. So David, thank you for agreeing to tell me a bit more about SOE today. So what was SOE?
Well, good afternoon, Helen. SOE was a covert organisation established in 1940, and really, to put it in context in terms of the Second World War, the fall of France and the evacuation of Dunkirk, May-June 1940, Winston Churchill, Prime Minister, really wanted to take the fight to Germany. So he tasked the Minister for Economic Warfare, a chap called Hugh Dalton, to establish a new organisation, the Special Operations Executive, to take the fight to Germany. And it was all about sabotage, subversion, assassination, reconnaissance, all the secret arts of spycraft. And it started in this very hotel.
So there is a link between SOE and the St Ermines Hotel?
That's right. The organisation was officially formed on the 22nd of July 1940, and they took over 3 rooms on the 4th floor, and literally within weeks they outgrew what they had and took over the top 3 floors of the hotel. And over time the organisation developed into 3 different groups: SO1, which was about propaganda, SO2, which was active operations, and SO3, which was about planning. SO1, the propaganda arm, was very, very quickly subsumed into a new organisation called the Political Warfare Executive, or PWE. And SO2 was the one group that remained after the restructuring and reorganisation in 1942. But it was really the mainstay of the organisation throughout the war. And the organisation grew at its height to 13,000 personnel across the world. So they had active agents operating behind enemy lines in all the countries occupied by the Axis powers.
So do we actually know when they started and they had this space in the hotel here? I mean, it's a very luxurious hotel, and to have this sort of clandestine stuff going on, presumably nobody ever knew. I mean, not in the wartime, but I don't think people know today, do they? I mean, how could they keep it so secret?
Well, this hotel's often been talked about in terms of links to secret intelligence world. There's a lot of spies have come through here to have clandestine meetings with their agents and such like. But the foundation of SOE was in this very building, and it wasn't until the end of October 1940 when they moved to the official headquarters, which was in Baker Street, 64 Baker Street, which is why they got that nom de guerre, which was the Baker Street Irregulars. But the organisation, the foundation and the furnace was in this very building, and this is why we've really built this display here in conjunction with the hotel to celebrate its foundation in the hotel itself.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit more about what's in the display and do you have any favourite pieces yourself?
Yep, so the display here is, we refer to it as the London Clandestine Warfare Collection, because it's lots of ephemera and memorabilia of the dark arts of spycraft, but also killing, silent killing, because the SOE agents were in that space. They were about assassinating key figures in the German regime and the Axis powers. So there's various killing implements and hidden maps and compasses that were given to airmen and SOE agents when they deployed into occupied Europe. We've got a Pigeon Carrier, because pigeons were used by SOE, and we've got a uniform of the Fanny, the first aid nursing yeomanry, which were a key part of SOE structures. A lot of women involved in SOE, around 5,000 personnel of the 13,000 were women.
Oh right, and of course they were dropped behind enemy lines and often picked up. I mean, we think of the history of SOE as being particularly dangerous, decimated by betrayal. You know, do you think that sacrifice was worth it?
Certainly. War is a dirty business, and SOE was established to carry out very clandestine and covert operations. And I think one of the main aspects of the work that's not often talked about is the logistics and supply that SOE was involved in bolstering the resistance movements across the Axis controlled areas of the world in Southeast Asia, but also occupied Europe. I think the rough estimates are around 5 million kilograms of equipment and supplies were dropped either via air or by sea or by land to help resistance movements. So take, for example, in occupied France, the work with the Maquis, the French resistance, was critical to winning the war and getting that bridgehead in 1944. And the sabotage that was carried out by the French resistance groups really slowed the resupply from the German forces and the reinforcements coming up from the south to prevent the Allies getting a bridgehead in Normandy. And that was a critical aspect of that reopening of the second front in Europe. It's often not talked about. But its most famous, I think one of the most famous operations that SOE ever carried out was against the heavy water plant in Norway in 1943, a very famous operation, but that really curtailed the Nazi nuclear atomic weapons program in the Second World War, and the world might have been a very different place if that operation had been unsuccessful.
Yeah, because we tend to think of agents being dropped behind enemy lines, but we're not always sure. Yes, they're involved in sabotage. We're not always sure just how the link, like you say, with the second front in Normandy and before that, the preparation so that the boots on the ground can do what they need to do to liberate Europe. So I think that's really helpful. Thank you. So in a sense then, SOE isn't an intelligence gathering organisation. They are not, am I right in thinking they're not gathering intelligence? They are purely, it's this whole thing about sabotage and making, blowing up stuff behind enemy lines and, connections and communications.
There were certain aspects of their work which did involve intelligence gathering. So they had a reconnaissance remit as well, and working very closely with resistance groups in Europe. Be it the Greek partisans or the French Maquis, they were involved in helping those groups gather intelligence on German positions or Italian positions and feeding that information back, often via wireless telegraphy, back to England and back to the Allied intelligence hub in London. Really important aspect of that work and critical to the information flow around Europe. So we knew what was going on. So some of the insights we were getting, certainly around Normandy and the D-Day landings, was actually from SOE working closely with the French resistance groups. So there was an aspect that spawned off SOE, like the Jedburgh teams, which were what we now refer to as special forces groups, who would deploy into France by parachute, small four-man teams, and they would report back on what the Maquis were seeing on the ground on railway stations in terms of German armour coming up from the south. They have those reporting lines open, and the wireless operators had a particularly dangerous job. The German direction finding teams on the ground in places like France were very good, and subsequently I think the shelf life for most wireless operators that worked for SOE were about 6 weeks. Very, very dangerous task.
So you've talked about the sort of killing side and behind enemy lines with SOE, but they had a very crucial piece of kit, didn't they, which you've brought to show me?
Yeah, this is the Sten Machine Gun. A very, very popular weapon in the Second World War. This is the Mark II, roughly dates to about 1942. And this is a very special one because it's got a silencer on the end which extended the barrel. And we supplied hundreds of thousands of these to resistance groups across Europe to help them and arm them with an effective killing weapon.
And these were used with the silencer by SOE agents?
Yeah, these were the ones with the silencers were used specifically by the agents themselves. Effective to about 100 metres.
And I love some of the items which supported what SOE was doing, and you've got something to show me today?
Yeah, this is one of my favourite items. In the display, it's essentially a carrier for a pigeon, a homing pigeon. So most aircraft in the military, when they were flying over occupied Europe, had pigeons with them. So if the aircraft went down, they could send a pigeon back to inform the authorities back in the Air Ministry. SOE was exactly the same. When the Lysanders and the Dakotas went into occupied Europe to take agents, they would take a pigeon with them. And if the aircraft had a problem or was hit by anti-aircraft, they deploy the pigeon back to Britain. And it's interesting that we've even got the capsules that were put on the legs of the pigeon to carry the message. And you can see this one's been coloured red, so this is a very, very important message.
Well, that must be quite rare, that's actually survived today.
These are very, very rare.
Yeah, incredible.
But it's fascinating how involved pigeons were. I think over the course of the Second World War, pigeon breeders and in the UK provided around 200,000 pigeons for the war effort. This is for the whole war effort and across Europe. So it's a fascinating insight, and obviously some of the famous birds won Dickens medals, the equivalent to the VC.
Yes, indeed. And then I think, did you say that you had another item, quite an unusual item to show us?
Yeah, so this item is a small fragment, about fist size, from Hitler's desk. And the story behind this is Colonel Richard Barry, who was the Chief of Staff for SOE during the Second World War. He, in 1945, was part of an SOE group that got into Berlin in front of the assault forces. And the Russians were tearing apart the German Chancellery, and they managed to get inside the Führer's office and were smashing up Hitler's marble desk. And Richard Barry managed to acquire a piece of the desk, which is going to be part of the collection.
But that's incredible, and it's got a medal on it with a swastika there, can I see?
Yeah,
yes, that's the swastika.
That's the Iron Cross, yeah.
Yeah, Iron Cross. Now, do we know, is that Hitler's Iron Cross?
I don't know the provenance of the cross itself, but certainly this is a genuine fragment from Hitler's desk.
Wow, that's
taken in July 1945.
Yeah. Gosh, so it kind of demonstrates, doesn't it, how artefacts have a story behind them. They're part of history, and they enable us to get a window into that history. So really, kind of what happened to SOE? I mean, presumably it didn't survive beyond the war. Was that it at the end of the war for SOE?
SOE, after VE Day, obviously the theatre in the Far East was still going on until the victory in Japan Day. And after the war, SOE did continue until about January 1946, when it was formally disbanded as an organisation. Hundreds of personnel were subsumed into MI6 as part of a special group within MI6. Obviously the tradecraft and skills they'd acquired in the Second World War were very important to take forward into peacetime and working against a new threat, which was the Russian threat in the Cold War.
But, I mean, fast forward to today, what do you think is the enduring legacy? I mean, why are people so fascinated by SOE today?
Well, this country's got a very rich history in spycraft and espionage, and as I mentioned earlier, war is often a dirty campaign, and SOE developed real specific killing and clandestine techniques, which were, you can see some of the killing implements in this collection, were quite macabre, but it was a dirty war, and we had to take the fight to the next level to win the war in Europe and also in the Far East. So SOE were really given carte blanche to do that by Churchill. They were given the remit to kill, to assassinate, and to create chaos, and that's exactly what they did. And taking that into the modern era, obviously the world is a very different place now, but the techniques that SOE pioneered in the Second World War have been taken forward into the modern era through special forces and intelligence services around the world, CIA, MI6, and other organisations in Europe and overseas.
David, thank you so much. That's been absolutely fascinating. And thank you for sharing those secrets of Special Operations Executive with us.
Thank you, Helen.
This has been a production for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. To find out more and to support the NCMI, please visit ncmi.co.uk.